Hi, it's Jan Beta, and this is a kind of personal episode about a very special Commodore 64. Now, this might not look special to you, but it is definitely special for me. This might just be the Commodore 64 that I first used, the one that my father bought in 1984 and brought home, and it was the family computer for quite a while. Now, there are two kind of different accounts of what kind of C64 this is. My father claims it is his first Commodore 64 that he bought, the first one he bought, and he passed it on to my sister when he completely switched to Amigas. I got my first own Commodore 64 in 1987. As you maybe know, it was the Aldi variant with the white keyboard or beige keyboard when it was discounted. And that was when my father bought his first Amiga 500. That later got passed down to me as well. So everything basically, my father bought the newest computer that was on the market and gradually passed it down through the family. My mother used Amigas at some point. This was the first real computer we had in the house. We had briefly had a TI 994A, I think earlier in 1984 probably, when they were heavily discounted because of the price war that was going on between Commodore and Texas Instruments at the time. My father bought one of those. That was the very first home computer I ever saw, touched. I was very little then. A short time later he bought a C64 and that might have been this one. My origin story of this is a bit different, unfortunately. I think he sold his C64 at some point and bought this from a coworker or something. I am not quite sure which story is true, but I just assume, because he told me, that this actually is the original C64 that he first got. And the first C64, I watched him playing games and programming basic stuff, and then did my first basic programs myself and things like that. He taught me a bit of that, and he worked on this quite a bit. You can see here that it has a kernel switcher and reset buttons and things like that. And I think today is the day that we're going to take a closer look at this. I hope it still works. I didn't power this on for quite some years. I'm sure this is the dust cover that my father made for his C64. He made that shortly after he got it, just from some packaging materials. And it actually worked so well that it stayed on here basically for all this time. That's why it's also pretty dust-free still after all those years. It is a bit yellowed, but other than that it looks pretty intact. It was taken care of quite well and tinkered with quite a bit. So let's take a look. So this knob here is actually a pretty elegant kernel switcher, and I believe there are separate EEPROMs for all these kernels in there with a little circuit board. The N is for normal, I think, that's just Commodore 64 basic. D is for Dolphin DOS, which we used back in the day. And D minus is a Dolphin DOS version that I think you can turn it down basically, this floppy speeder in Dolphin DOS to make it more compatible, and this is a slightly lighter version of Dolphin DOS that is more compatible. And H, I think, is for Hyperload, which is a pretty popular fast loader, very basic one here in Germany. And then we have a reset switch, a normal one, and an XROM switch. So if you hit these together, you have a harder reset. That was pretty common to mod things like that back in the day. Yeah, otherwise, it looks like a pretty normal Commodore 64. It has some paint particles on here. It's one that was made in England, actually. This is the serial sticker, and the made in England also points towards this being a relatively early model, like the 1984 models were, I think, mostly made in England that were available in Germany. They also made some in Western Germany. That's mostly the ones that came before these, I think, and the ones that came after these. But I think 1984, most of the ones I've seen from that era that were sold here in Germany were made in England, actually. So, yeah, the serial number, pretty standard. They sold a lot of these, as you probably know, pretty early on. Pretty normal C64 with a bit of history. Let's take a look inside, I guess. Let me take a few seconds to thank the sponsor for this video, PCBWay, my favorite manufacturer of prototype PCBs of all kinds. They can also do CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication, injection molding. They can populate your boards for you. They also have a service that helps you design your boards in the first place. All these services are super affordable and of very high quality. They are very friendly people to work with, so I highly recommend checking out the link in the video description in case you're interested in such services. Back to the C64. So, just 3 screws, as usual. And of course, this was opened before, as you've seen. It was modded, I think, by my father. I am not quite sure about that, but I think this might just be the Commodore 64 from back then. It looks pretty clean in here. Surprisingly clean. The shielding is still in here, which is just a cardboard. I usually remove that from my C64, so I might remove that from this one as well. So let's have a look at the circuit board. Yeah, this is a later one. This is not the original one that my father had. I was pretty sure about that. But this still was the one that my sister got. There are some chips in here that are from 1985. There are some from 84 in here. Most of the chips are from 1985, early 1985. These are our ROMs. We have 4 ROMs. Original ROM, Dolphin DOS, and the Hyperload EEPROM here. And this whole construction just plugs into the kernel ROM socket, obviously, and a little flat cable that connects to the kernel switcher. An original SID chip from 1985, 12th week 1985, so this is early 1985. Yeah, there are several things that I might have gotten wrong when my father got the C64. It might have been in 85, but I think we had magazines and things like that in 84 already. I'm not sure. I'm still not sure. I'm just going to assume this was my father's. Well, that's a bit inconclusive regarding the origin of this. This might still be the original C64, the family C64 that my father first brought home, but he must have bought it in early 85 then, if that is the case. I don't remember, and neither does he, when exactly he bought the C64. 85 might be an option because I'm pretty sure he got the TI in 1984. Yeah. We got our reset switch connected to the cartridge port, actually, and to the user port here. This thing here, where the VIC-2 chip is soldered shut. So I can't really get to that without doing some more work on this. Yeah, but it all looks reasonably clean. It looks reasonably good. There was some work done to this, but yeah, probably the kernel ROM got desoldered and a socket got soldered in and this got added. It's all pretty neat, actually. Yeah, I'm just going to put it back together and try to pour this on, I guess. Let's see what we get. Maybe this needs fixing. Maybe this just needs a good cleaning and some future-proofing. We're going to find out shortly. Of course, I'm not going to use the original power supply, although I still have that, the one that came with this. But as you probably know, the original C64 power supplies are not the most reliable in the world, and they are basically endangering the survival of these machines. And if there was ever a C64 that I wanted to survive, it's this one. This was in the family for decades. And it still is. It's not mine. Okay, going to hook this up to the screen here, and we're just going to give it a try. This mostly ran in the Dolphin DOS position, I think. because that was what was in the 1541 disk drive that I also still have, thankfully. I've made videos about that, I think. That was part of my original C64 setup. The story regarding that is that my father, when he got his Amiga, I got my first Commodore 64, and he gave me his old disk drive that he used with presumably this C64. So it had Dolphin DOS in it, which I wasn't able to use because my Aldi C64 didn't have a Dolphin DOS ROM in it. So I got a final cartridge later on and used that as the fast loader. But his C64 was modded with Dolphin DOS once that became available, because it is one of the best fast loaders for the C64 still. Yeah. Long story short, okay, let's not waste any more time here. Let's try whether or not this thing actually powers on and if it's fully working. I'm going to run some tests, I guess. Okay, let's see. Here goes nothing. Power LED comes on. And we get the DOS Hypercent Basic. That's what's in here. Nice. Does it have... I don't even know what this is, really. So this is what it says. DOS Hypercent Basic. I'm not sure. This is some kind of fast loader and some kind of basic extension, I think. Let's switch it to the normal mode, I guess. See if that powers up. Yay! That's our regular C64 startup screen. That's so cool! It still works after all those years. Dolphin DOS. Yep. And the slightly lightened Dolphin DOS. Yeah. It says 64K RAM System Plus here. And it doesn't have the function keys that Dolphin DOS usually has. Do the reset switches work? That's the normal reset. And XROM and reset also works. Nice. Okay. So far so good. Let's throw some test cartridge at it, I guess. Okay, dead test cartridge. It takes a while to start up. Yeah, that starts up fine. No surprise there. Let's see if it actually tests everything as good. Probably will. If a C64 outputs anything at all, and it is the correct basic startup screen, it's probably going to be okay. Because, as you maybe know after watching some of my C64 repair videos, by far the most common fault in Commodore 64s is just displaying a blank screen, basically. Basically, if anything is horribly wrong, it's just going to display a blank screen. As soon as you get the basic startup screen, things are probably pretty okay. Yeah, this seems to work just fine. That's pretty cool. Yeah. That brings back some memories. We never had a color screen on this. My sister, when she got it, she had a color screen. The Philips monitor that I still have, actually, that was her first monitor. And I think my father had this on a black and white monitor or a green monitor. I don't even remember. It's quite long ago and I was very little. Yeah, I can't hear anything from the SID. Oh, there we are. Helps if I turn the volume up. Yeah, sounds fine to me. Let's do the test harness tests. That was the dead test cartridge. That's not a very in-depth test. But this one is a bit more in-depth and tests the ports and things. I'm not going to hook the keyboard dongle up, so that's probably going to fail, but the rest of it should probably... just going to put it into the normal ROM mode. Because I think this also detects the ROM. See, maybe it works fully. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Yeah, the keyboard, as I said, I didn't hook up the connector, the test connector for that. It's fine. It's actually fine. Yeah, this must be one of the first C64s that just fully works that I get on my bench here. Yeah, everything seems to be just fine with this. I am going to start some games and things like that and see if this actually fully works. But yeah, there's nothing that says broken so far. I'm going to play some games and enjoy this machine for a bit, and then I'm probably going to go in and do some future-proofing moves that I've done quite a few times on this channel. There are a few videos, so I'm not going to go into much detail about that, I guess. So far, it's a completely working, very dear to my heart C64. Might put another ROM in there. The one with the Hyper-Send basic. I don't even know what that is, and it's probably not really useful, at least not these days. Might put the Jiffy DOS ROM in there or something. As you've seen, it's just separate socketed EEPROMs, 8K EEPROMs. So should be no big deal, just replacing the Hyper-Send basic one. That's probably one little modification I'm going to do. Yeah, it just seems to work fine. Played some games, and this is one that I tend to use for testing the VIC chip. If the VIC chip is failing, this often displays flickery sprites and things like that. This is Comic Bakery. It's a really nice little game, I love this. And also one of the games that I actually played on this one, I think. So yeah, it appears to be just fine. And that is pretty remarkable, given how many faulty C64s I had here over the years. Yeah, so this video is not going to be a repair video. It's just going to be a slight refurbishment of this historical piece of technology for me personally. So I took the circuit board out here to be able to work on it. I'm going to leave the wires in place, I think. I just took the little kernel switcher thing out. And yeah, circuit board looks pretty good. No signs of extensive rework, except for the kernel socket here that has been added. And yeah, all the other chips seem to be original. No MOS logic chips in here and no MT RAM chips. Thankfully, this is a 250425 board revision, so it has way less capacitors than the earlier boards. This is already the third iteration, I think, of the C64 boards at that point in time. So they did some cost reducing already and reduced the number of components, which makes it also a lot easier to work on than the original boards. And I'm just going to do my regular moves. At first we need to remove this shield here. This doesn't even have a connection to the VIC-2 chip that is underneath. This is just shielding, and some of the ones that have a detachable lid on here have a little tab that goes to the center of the VIC-2 chip, because that runs pretty warm, and so on those this acts as a heatsink. But this doesn't have this, so this is pretty useless these days. And that's just shielding to make it FCC compliant, I think, back in the day. So first step, get this shield here out of the way. I think it's just 2 solder tabs here. That's pretty stubborn. Oh, there's a lot of solder on the top side. There we go. That taught it. And that's a period correct PAL 6569 revision 3 from the 14th week of 85. And this 8701 timing chip is also from the 38th week of 84. So this is a slightly earlier one, but I assume these are the original chips that this got populated with in the factory, because this clearly was never removed. And you can't get to the chips with the shielding in place there. I think while I'm at it, and the soldering iron is heated up, I might just remove the RF modulator here as well, because there are some capacitors in there that needs removing and replacing. Yeah, you can see that there are some signs of hand soldering. That's because I think these RF modulators in some of the ports here were soldered after moving this through the solder bath. These were actually hand soldered. And of course there's the reworked kernel ROM socket. But these connectors, some of the plasticky connectors were just added after adding most of the components, I think, and the RF modulator as well. So that's pretty normal. So let's see if we can desolder this one here. I think I might have a heating problem here. This doesn't want to melt any solder, basically. Got most of the solder out, but not all of it. So I'm just going to try, maybe crank up the temperature again and use some solder wick here. These are not trivial to desolder. Yeah, if you don't have to, you don't really need to do this. But there's also some good replacements for these now in case you don't need RF output. As you probably know, I do need RF output sometimes. So I'm mostly leaving these in. Yeah, there we go. That took a while. I'm going to try something for the first time while recapping this, and that is replacing these actual capacitors with radial capacitors. On some C64 board revisions you have pads here, solder points. I think they added these because they used whatever was in stock anyway at Commodore, usually at that time. And yeah, I think they added these to the circuit board just in case the actual caps would be less expensive or something. So this has, these are also marked. We have plus, plus, and this is the ground plane. So we should be able to replace these 3 actual capacitors that are on this board with radial capacitors. I'm going to try that for the first time, I believe. Should be no problem because these points are connected to ground. So the negatives of these are just connected to ground, and that is a ground connection on here. So should be possible. And I'm running a bit low on actual caps. I have the actual caps for this still, but the 1000 microfarad one is the last one I have in stock. So probably I'm going to just use radial ones here because I have more of those. And they are easier to get nowadays anyway. And there we go. Connected the positive leads to the leftmost pin from this perspective, and the negative leads to the other one. So there's 3 pins. The one in the center was used for the actual caps, and the outer 2 you can use for these. It should work fine. Should be electrically absolutely the same as before, but with newer caps, quite obviously. And we're going to replace the remaining capacitors. That's just a few, and then a few in the RF modulator. And I think I really need to clean my desoldering gun here. Yeah, that's not going to fly. Just going old school. So using all the old school tools I have at my disposal. The regular old school desoldering pump here. Because my soldering station doesn't want to cooperate. And this actually works really well too. Yay! Yeah, that's all the capacitors on the board, I think. Let's look at this thing here, which is soldered shut, as usual. Yeah, this has a solder blob here. Some of them are soldered shut on the bottom and the top, but this one isn't, thankfully. So we just have to remove this to get the top lid out. Let's see if we can do that with the desoldering pop. Going to add some fresh solder, and there we go. It melts. Just going to remove some of the solder here. Yep, it should be free. So now we should be able to take this whole thing apart. Yay! Oh, it's soldered on the bottom as well. This one. Okay. Just going to heat that up while I lift this. There we go. And there are 4 capacitors in there, electrolytic capacitors. So let's see if we can replace these 4. Not strictly necessary, as I said, but it usually makes the picture a bit clearer on these. And if you want an even clearer picture and no RF out, you might want to consider getting one of the replacement RF modulator things. And you need small capacitors for this, of course, because you want to close the lid again, ideally. Got this one recapped. It's kind of fiddly with these little things. So again, I won't recommend this, but I do it anyway, because it sometimes improves the video output a bit. So closing the lid on this one. And we're going to solder this to that again. And also going to close this one again. And putting the ground blob on there. Yeah, that should do. And we get this back into the circuit board. And I'm going to put my little mark on here, I guess. There is a pretty interesting service mark on there, like probably quality control. And this is one that I didn't see before. This might seem like a silly idea, but who knows where this is going to end up and who's going to work on this. So I just like to leave a bit of lore. Okay, that should be that. I'm going to give this a proper cleaning afterwards, but we need to test this at this point, I guess. Yay! And the picture indeed is a bit clearer than before. Nice! So I suppose what I'm going to do now is to put some heat sinks, at least on the VIC, and yeah, the SID is going to be difficult on this one because there's our kernel switcher over that. That's not going to work. Not sure what to do about that. But yeah, the VIC2 needs a heatsink. I'm just going to get one and put it on there. And then clean it up a bit, and then we should be done. Yeah, here's the problem. The SID is under here, and this basically, there's not a lot of room. Just a very tiny gap there. And you don't want to put something conductive underneath this. They probably didn't plan for somebody 40 years later trying to put a heatsink on that chip. But at least I can put one on here. The other chips, the SIDs, the first revision, they get pretty warm, of course. But yeah, the other chips are probably going to be fine. These are the ROMs. And our PLA can get a heatsink and our VIC-2 can get a heatsink. I think that's what I'm going to do. That's the chips that get the warmest in normal operation. VIC-2, PLA, and the SID. And the SID in this case, I kind of want to keep this in there because it's historically accurate. But yeah, can't put a heatsink on the SID, I'm afraid. So we're just going to put this stuff on there and our regular heat sinks. And this takes a while to cure, so I'm going to have time to find the proper heat sink for this size. 28 pins, there we go. And yeah, this stuff basically turns into cement and it remains heat conductive. You can feel the heat coming off the heat sinks when you put it on. But this takes a couple of hours to cure or so. So yeah, we're going to wait a while. I think that's all the heat sinks I want to put into this. And then we're going to give it a final cleaning and put it back in the case. So I tested this again and everything still seems to be fine, which is great, of course. And all that remains to be done is to clean the circuit board and the case parts. And I'm not going to put the case parts in water this time. I'm just going to wipe them and dust them off. The circuit board is going to be cleaned with some circuit board cleaner to remove my solder residue and also the solder residue that was on there from factory, seemingly. And yeah, then we're going to put it back together. I'm first going to use the vacuum cleaner to clean the case parts and the keyboard, I think, and then go on with cleaning the circuit board. Let's do it! I'm also going to give these edge connectors a bit of a cleaning and use an eraser for that. So you can see these are pretty dirty, but this is the future was 8-bit secret weapon for removing dirt from PCB edge connectors. And of course we want to do both sides and remove the residue from the pencil eraser afterwards. But this works really well on these gold contacts or gold plated contacts. Shiny! And now I'm going to use alcohol to remove the residue from the eraser, I guess. And of course the whole thing could be cleaned up even more by putting it in the sink with some soapy water or things like that. But yeah, usually I would do that. But in this case, I am pretty eager to protect all the writing on it and things like that. So I'm not going to do that in this case. Just going to give it a bit of a wipe on the surface, which is enough. It wasn't that dirty. This is definitely not going to be passed on to somebody else. This is going to stay in the family. Yeah, I'm going to put some contact cleaner into all the contacts, the cartridge port and the DIN sockets here and the joystick ports and the power DIN socket here. Just to make sure it makes good contact on all of these. And I'm going to leave the shielding out, as I usually do. This goes here. Yeah. It's really not in bad condition. It is a bit yellowed, but other than that, the case has some very small cracks in it, but nothing major at all. I've seen much, much worse. And there we go. All back together. Nice. And it still works fine after reassembling, surprisingly. And it looks really clean now. at least clean enough for my taste, and I can use the family Commodore 64 as a daily driver, basically. I have some more plans for this. Eventually, I'm going to put a new ROM in here, and I'm probably going to try to make the ROM on the C64 itself, because I have some EEPROM programmers I can try. Maybe this is a good opportunity, because we had this Hypra Send basic ROM in there that I don't really know if it's any good. It's a pretty old fast loader, I believe, if it's based on Hypraload, which was one of the first floppy speeders for the Commodore 64. Pretty smart at the time, but I believe it was from 1984 or something, so we got some better ones after that. Yeah, maybe I'm going to put Jiffy DOS in here or something like that, which I like a lot. I hope you enjoyed this kind of trip down memory lane for me. I'm a bit sorry that this wasn't broken, but I'm also not sorry that this wasn't broken, and pretty happy that it wasn't broken. Probably would have made a more interesting video if it had some flaws, but I can't find any. It's just working absolutely fine. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. That's it for today. Thank you very much for your time. Special thanks, as usual, to everybody who supports me on Patreon or on Ko-fi or on the YouTube channel memberships page or elsewhere. Much appreciated. You keep this channel and me alive, basically. So thank you very much. That's it for today. I'm Jan Beta. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.